Gonna get started in just a moment. All right, I think we are good to get started. Hello and welcome everyone to today's virtual event for CIC Virtual CIC Talks. Today we have Monica Gill from the Working Group for Inclusivity in Chemical Sciences, Engineering and Technology Network to bring us Paulette Vincent-Ruz from University of Michigan. So this CIC series is brought to you by the members of the Chemical Institute of Canada. The CIC works to connect the Canadian chemical sciences community to our constituent societies. CIC Talks are a series of virtual discussions amplifying and the fantastic work of members of our chemical sciences community and what they're doing to tackle some of the biggest issues in society and globally right now. So with that, while we can't join physically, I will thank you all for being here, and I'll pass it over to Monica to really get us started in today's great event.
Thank you, Keith. It's a really big honor to be here representing the committee. I get to introduce Paulette today. Paulette Vincent-Ruz is a postdoctoral associate in chemical education at the University of Michigan. And she graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from the National Autonomous University of Mexico in Mexico, and then obtained her Ph.D. in Learning Sciences and Policy from the University of Pittsburgh. And now her research seeks to build an understanding of the systemic disadvantages that hinder the success of marginalized students in chemistry and their effect on intellectual resources. And so thanks to her really unique combination of chemistry, disciplinary knowledge, and education, she became the first chemical education researcher named a future leader in chemistry on the year 2019 by CAS. So it's my great pleasure to hand it over to Paulette, and we're really excited to hear what you have to say, Paulette. Welcome.
Okay, can everybody see my presentation slide?
Yep.
Cool, thank you. Thank you for the introduction and the invitation to both CIC and the CWIC. I'm super excited to be here. Before I start, if you want to participate in like a couple of slides that I have for audience participation, go to menti.com and you can input this code that appears on the screen. The code will appear again when the questions become relevant, but like if you want to start doing that, I will appreciate it. I think they're gonna put this on the chat too, so don't worry if you miss it. But today I want to talk about what does it mean to be a chemist, and what are the implications of our ideas of what it means to be a chemist on the way we train people in undergrad, the way we perceive people to be successful in undergrad, and what is the role that chemistry education research can have to support marginalized populations in chemistry. I usually start my presentations with a land acknowledgement, usually of the place I'm presenting at. Given that everybody's virtual today, I'm gonna do a land acknowledgement of Michigan, Ann Arbor, because that is where I'm currently standing in. So I wanna acknowledge and pay respect to the original and rightful owners of this land in which I'm giving this talk from today. The land of Ann Arbor, Michigan has always been a land where learning has happened and teaching has happened, right? It didn't start the moment the university started, it was always a thing, a present thing. And so I wanna honor the ancestral lands in which I'm currently residing. So now I wanna talk a little bit about me. So as I mentioned, I'm an alumni of the National University of Mexico. This is the largest university in my country, has approximately 350,000 students. And I know that number sounds huge because it is. I'm proudly graduated from the School of Chemistry. We even become viral for a second on the year of the periodic table because we did this in one of the buildings when I didn't do it because I was already here in the United States, but you know what I mean. So I was really happy there. And that is when like I truly fell in love with the concept of chemistry, right? I was like enamored with it. I'm fascinated. And that led me to like work in an organic chemistry lab for over 4 years. I was a co-author in a publication. And I also was, I did a dissertation and it was also an organic synthesis. So like I spent a lot of time in the lab talking to my glassware and fighting with my columns. as any other organic chemist could think about. I also like decorating my workplace. As you can see, like if I had to have my septums, I needed to have a pretty box for my septums, right? I needed to have like everything in pink and bright colors so I could feel at home there. And so everybody knew which one was my bench, as you can see in this picture. And then after I finished college, I was taking some graduate classes, and at the same time, I was a teacher in middle school. So these were my students. It was an only girls school. It was a nun school. It was actually the same school I attended when I was in elementary school. So I'm a product of nun school and like only girls schools too. And it was in this place where I like actually got to face for the first time that a lot of my insecurities about science were not only mine, right? When I was hearing my students talk about how they didn't thought they could be scientists because their role was supposed to get married, because they were told that they were not smart enough for it, I realized, right, I was not the only person that felt like that. And things that I thought that were like only my things were more systemic. And so that drove me to actually want to study education in chemistry. And I obtained my degree from the University of Pittsburgh. But this caused also a crisis in me, because by not graduating from a school of chemistry with my PhD, I actually wondered, do I still get to be a chemist? Do I still get to call myself a chemist, right? And chemistry education research usually has that problem. We're not recognized as part of chemistry by everybody. And so people that do this sort of research, even though we have the disciplinary knowledge, even though we've been in the labs, even though we can communicate with chemists, right? We sometimes don't get validated in that identity. And it was probably because of that, that I decided that my dissertation was gonna be in science identity. And so what I studied in my dissertation was, well, we know that women of color, for example, when they talk about why they persisted in science, they persisted because they said they had strong science identity and they identified so much with the science that they made them strong enough to succeed. We also know that girls that have science identity, specifically girls of color, are more likely to persist during high school and middle school doing science activities if they have high science identity. And we also know that that science identity gets trampled by society, right? If we're constantly receiving messages that say we don't belong somewhere, that science identity is gonna go down, right? Because the messages we receive are also important. So in my dissertation, I conceptualized science identity as a process of two things. The first process is that you ascribe characteristics to yourself. So you say, I am a science person or I am a chemistry person because these are the characteristics of scientists or chemists, and I have those, right? And so I want you to go into menti.com, use the code, and give me 1 to 3 characteristics of a chemist that you have. So think about things about a chemist that a chemist should have that you also have, and submit them here, please, and they will appear in a word cloud if everything works out like it should. Yes, it's working at least. And so we're seeing like the questions that are like the words that are like becoming more prominent, right? Curiosity is one of them. Passion, analytical, creative, problem solving, inquisitive, critical thinker, love for chemistry, right? Like you need to actually love this. And then I think a lot of words are really similar. Collaborative, it seems to be like in smaller font, but I will address that part. So like I'm gonna move on, but thank you all for putting those questions. Well, those words there. Okay, and the second characteristic is you need to feel accepted in the community. We don't become chemists only by saying we are. We become chemists when we get a degree, when we get a job related to chemistry, when we feel like the community of other chemists are accepting us as part of it, right? And that is why when I moved to a degree in social sciences, even though I was still doing chemistry research, even though I still had a passion for chemistry, even though I still saw myself as chemist, I had an identity crisis because I felt my credential was not gonna be accepted by the chemistry community, right? And so that acceptance process is usually where like a lot of the problems happen. And so now, right, same exercise, but now you're gonna tell me, how do you know if other chemists recognize you as part of their community? So like think about people that you think are important to you, chemists, and what signals have they given you to tell you that they have. It could be the degree you have, it could be the job you have, it could be words of affirmation you've gotten. I know this is a little bit more like harder to answer. Twitter, I think Twitter is a great way of being validated as a chemist. I agree with that. Invitations, give presentations, degrees, awards, publishing. I love that Twitter is like one of the biggest words right now. Publications, awards, exactly. So right, we're getting this sort of like affirmation from the community. And it was actually thanks to Twitter that I remain feeling as a chemist, because chemists on Twitter keep welcoming me as part of the community, right? And so publishing, right, if we were just writing papers and we kept being rejected and we had nothing out, that would be like, well, am I really truly doing something important? Receiving awards, publishing, right? All of these things. And so this leads me to this idea that a chemist is actually socially constructed. So when we think a chemist, right, it's not like a thing that we can just define so easily, right? Some people would say if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck, right? But the idea of what a chemist is not as easily defined. Why? Because the definition of what a chemist is has changed over time, right? Some people, when you read historical works, it says, well, like the original chemists were the alchemists, right? But when like chemistry became more empirical and started having more rules about evidence and how to follow certain procedures, right? Like there was this division between people that remained doing like more esoteric alchemy and like people that were considered chemists, etc. Right, and so this is the reason why I posted a question on Twitter yesterday or 2 days ago. So I asked Professor Kramer, like, when did you say computational chemistry started? Did it started when like the first person did just theoretical chemistry, or it was until like actual computers were happening, right? And so it was really interesting because they were like, no, it's when Allinger took over Michigan's computer at nights and weekends to do it, right? So because doing computational was not part of chemistry, right? He didn't even have a right to have the computers during work times, and he had to use them when nobody was using them, right? Like there was not this approval in the sense of like giving them resources during the days, right? Because it was not a thing. So that was one of them. And a chemist is socially constructed, right? A chemist, when we are growing up, this is what we see as chemists. And I can still not like hold my excitement about having 2 women get into work today. But even though maybe us say the novel is important, it recognizes things, but it knows everything, we also cannot deny that kids in school, this is what they see, right? And today, a lot of girls woke up with this, and this matters. But even that, again, socially constructed, you're gonna hear some people say, well, is biochemistry chemistry, right? Oh, we're just giving the Nobel Award to biologists now, right? There was this man that also deserved the award, and I'm not saying his contributions were not important. What I'm saying is like, even this is sort of controversial, right? There's people that think this award is not valid unless it's given only to certain type of chemistry. It's only given to certain type of people, right? And so I think it's important to remember that things like that, maybe not the definition of chemist for us as chemists, but society uses this as a definition of what is a chemist. And so this is gonna lead me to actually change the way I think about chemistry education. So really chemistry culture is centered in a Eurocentric framework. So let's just start with that. The things that we value in science tend to have a Eurocentric lens. And we have a culture. We have things that we recognize and we have socially constructed to accept what a chemist is. So in order to accept, to access that chemistry identity, right? You need to have things that fall within this box, this Eurocentric chemistry culture box. And I'm gonna give an example. So for example, let's say there's this girl from LA that wants to go study chemistry at Harvard to follow her boyfriend that broke up with her, right? And like arrives to classroom with like really bright color clothes and like a heart-shaped notebook, right? And just sits down with you in like general chemistry 1. And like a lot of people will probably turn around and be like, what are you doing here? And I'm not exaggerating because I was not following my boyfriend to Harvard, but I did arrive to general chemistry 1 with a pink notebook, a backpack that had Tinkerbell on it, and pink pens, right? And so a lot of people thought I didn't belong there because I was not giving the dive an image of what they thought a person that was studying science should have. And so some friends in college did used to say that I was legally blonde in chemistry. But let's say this person persists, gets their degree, and what we usually think about chemistry identity would be that then they will access it and they will become a chemist, right? And they will look and act like a chemist. But we know this is not true. And if you're a woman of color specifically, you know what I mean when I'm saying like, you don't fit into this box and you will never become the person in this box, no matter how hard you try, right? What actually happens, because this is not true. People don't transform completely to access this identity. I think sometimes the system wants us to transform completely, and we do change some of our behaviors, right? Like people do change some of their behaviors to like fit in. We know some women in chemistry say that they had to tone down the way they talk in meetings because they were seen as too aggressive. So they learned how to not be perceived as aggressive. So women in chemistry will change the way they dress. So they are like not threatened by the fact that they like skirts, right? And so there's this transformation that happens, but it's not complete because you don't leave who you are at the door. What really happens is that you stay in this sort of border where like, when you are in certain environments, you're gonna try your best to fit into this description of what a chemist socially is and that people have imposed on you. And you will probably have another side of you where you're expressing those other things that you're living through. And to this process, I call border crossing. So border crossing is acknowledging the people that are marginalized in chemistry and in science are never leaving who they are at the door. They just learn how to come in and back from the border to access their chemistry identities when it happens. And so in a way, when we are supporting people in chemistry, even as educators, as professors, as people in the industry, we need to think about then how to support people make this border crossing happen, because if they never do the border crossing, they're never gonna get the recognition. But usually we stop at that, right? What we really need to do is like, yes, support them to do the border crossing, but change things so the border expands. And so it will get a point, right, when arriving to a general chemistry classroom with a pink notebook and gel pens and like Tinkerbell in your backpack is not a thing that is really seen within the culture. And this is a really extreme example, but that is like what we're fighting for. We want the border crossing to happen. So little by little, we're gonna expand the borders of what chemistry actually means and what is a chemist actually means. So it actually includes the people that have been marginalized and left out for such a long time. And so for this, I created a framework. I just literally sat down one day and said, we don't have the resources to think about these things because we fail sometimes as chemistry education researchers to think about things both at the individual level and the systemic level. And I sat down during the pandemic and wrote a book chapter about how can we think about these things working together. And I called it the Resources for Equitable Activation of Chemical Thinking. And because that is a mouthful, it's actually called the REACT framework. It's a really chemistry name. And if you're seeing this framework, you're probably saying, well, yeah, but Paulette, you just broke 50 rules about how to show graphics in your presentation. This has no colors, the font is too small, it has too many words. I don't understand half of the words that are saying. Like, if I don't understand what your literature, how do I know what this means? It's too big, it's too complex, and this is on purpose. This is just me to show you that thinking about these things is complex, right? But it doesn't mean every single study will have all these pieces together. And so I want to talk about how we can start thinking about these things just from the basics. And so to talk about the basics of the REACT framework, I'm going to first talk about what intellectual resources are. I mentioned the word chemistry identity. Identity is part of intellectual resources. I am also going to talk about engagement in chemical thinking, which is actually what we want to happen every time you're in industry, in a lab, or in a classroom. I'm going to talk about what it means to change our thinking as instructors from transfer to activation, the power of the learning environment, and some conclusions. And so let's start with intellectual resources. Intellectual resources are your students' science multi-tool pocket knife. So I want you to think about it. If every student arrived to your classroom, or every chemist arrives to your lab or company with like a tool knife, right? And what happens is that this is highly dependent on access, privilege, and past experiences. Some people's multi-tool pocket knife will look like the left image. Some people's will look like the right? And you cannot do anything about it. That is just how they arrived, right? In the sense of like, you cannot change the past. And so you could, in theory, unpack this and like open up the tool knife and add new tools. So you can do that, but it takes time and patience, right? You need to like sit down, you need to open up the tool, you need to take off all the pieces, you need to buy a new piece, you need to put it all back in, you need to make sure no screws are left over after, like an IKEA furniture gone bad, right? All of these things. And so you can add more tools. We can add more tools for people, right? But it will take time and patience. And sometimes we don't recognize that it requires time and patience to develop new skills and things. And so that is the second thing I want to talk about. They're semi-malleable, but there's things we can do in the immediate present while people develop the tools. And so intellectual resources will be things like knowledge, right? Everybody will say, of course, in order to be a chemist, you need to know chemistry. You need to understand a concept like what is a nucleophile, what is a crystal structure, right? Things like that. A chemist also should have sense-making skills. So sense-making skills are understanding how to ask questions, what kind of questions can be asked with chemistry. It also means understanding the methods. But also a sense-making skill is speaking the language of chemistry, something that usually is not recognized because people like to say this is a universal language. However, unless we have sign language that says this is an electron, right? Then people that are deaf cannot access chemistry, right? So speaking the language is not as easy as saying this universal thing just because we use drawings. If we have non-native English speakers, they have to usually balance their native language, the English language, plus the chemistry language when they're writing, when they're like in presentations, when they're in conferences. So sense-making skills is broader than I think we usually talk about. And this is important. And they're not as universal as we usually talk about. But also, a thing that we usually admit is like the role of affective resources. So affective resources are like competency beliefs. It's the belief that I have a skill, that I have the knowledge, that I have the ability to do something. So a really important thing about this is that it doesn't mean you have it. It means that you believe you have it. And in my work, I have shown that women, when they believe they don't have it, even if they do, they don't succeed in applying the tool. So they may have the tool, but they don't succeed in applying it because they believe they don't have it, right? And so affective resources actually interact with knowledge and sense-making skills, right? They interact and they work together, and they need to be synergistic in order for somebody to be able to be successful at chemistry. And a lot of times people don't want to recognize this as intellectual resources because historically they were called affective, right? Because it has to do with emotions, like having a science identity or having interest and curiosity of chemistry, right? But I want to remind everybody that all of these things happen in the brain, in the chemical reactions that happen in our brain, right? Not in our hearts, right? So affective resources are also intellectual. And so intellectual resources is a combination of your knowledge, your sense-making skills, and your affective resources, right? And those three things are equally important. Okay. Even though it seems sometimes that in the classroom we only care about the knowledge part because somebody sitting in the front of a class just talking for an hour is not going to develop sense-making skills, and it's not going to develop affective resources. But that is like a soapbox for another day. Okay, so engagement in chemical thinking. Engagement in chemical thinking is actually what happens in the classroom. It is the outcome. It is the application of the tool, right? So what we actually want is for people in your class to be thinking about chemistry, but not memorizing. We want people in your class to engage socially, and we want people in your class to have happy feelings in the moment. But this is in the moment, right? Intellectual resources are a tool. Engagement in chemical thinking, it's an outcome, it's a thing that happens in a moment in time. And so engagement in chemical thinking is actually students using those intellectual resources, is what happens when they actually use their intellectual resources. And psychologists will broadly define it as a learner's focus, participation, and persistence given a task. And so the example I'm showing you here is that if you have a multi-took bucket knife, right, and I give you a can, you will use the can opener and you will open that can, right? And so engagement is the act of opening the can, and you will open it and chemistry knowledge will like just pour into your brain almost. Like not exactly like that, but like that is how I want you to think about it. Like knowledge will happen, learning will happen. Okay, so as I said, thinking disciplinary engagement is important, right? Like we want people to think about how molecules interact in their brains, how molecules are not shaped, but like 3D structures in their brain, how they're possibly reacting in the brain, right? Like you're trying to imagine all these things in your head. But also, chemist is more about that. And I think this is where like a lot of the times there's this disconnect between what we're asking people to do in the classrooms and we're asking people to do once they graduate. Because social engagement is also part of being a chemist. You need to speak the language, but you also need to communicate it, right? We call up these things soft skills, right? When we talk about like the industry saying things we're not good at training, they say like, chemists need to be, like have these soft skills. We need to train them to be communicators, and we need to train them to be like better at like giving presentations and all these things. Like, I almost feel like this conversation is if like you could like open your phone and download an app, and like that is what we want chemists to do. Just like open your phone and download the app in order to give a good presentation, and open the app and download it in order to be a good mentor. Instead of talking about it like a good chemist, our social construction of what chemist is, includes being a mentor, right? We don't talk about it like that. We never say that in order to be a good chemist, you need to be a good mentor, or good at least to communicate the knowledge of chemistry. Like, have you guys ever thought, have you folks ever stopped to think about it? Like, we never include it. We always have it to the side, right? And I wanna push against that. Not only because the industry is asking for it, and thanks LC for the conversation we had about it the other day, but like, because it's important for training the next generation, right? How are we gonna train the next generation if we're not good at communicating the knowledge and teaching them that actually, even though we think in academia you're gonna be isolated doing your experiment, you also learn by communicating with your grad student, like other people, other postdocs, other grad students in the lab, by having conversations, by brainstorming with them, by going to a conference and network. Like, all of these things matter and help us create knowledge, right? So it is part of chemical thinking. It is part of engaging with chemistry. And the other is the affective engagement. We would not be here if we hated what we do. I mean, I hope so. I mean, yes, there are days when I hated doing columns because columns are horrible, but like I would not have stayed in organic chemistry for 40 years if I hated it, right? So like feeling happy things when you're doing chemistry is important, because that is why we're still where we are. And that is why we have careers in this, right? And so why we don't value that in the classroom, why we don't think that teaching people that they can have happy feelings when learning and thinking about chemistry is not a part of why we are, right? We're not robots. And none of us are here because like we don't have happy, like we all enjoy what we're doing. And so the outcome, what we want in the classroom is to maximize these things as most as possible. And maybe not all of them will be high all the time, but we want them that anything we do will at least make them go up at certain points in time, right? And the question becomes then, if engagement is the application of your intellectual resources, how do you maximize this outcome when people arrive with different tools? Because it comes to that. Creating high engagement for somebody that went to a really fancy high school and had all the science experiences when they were growing up, and their parents took them to museums and sent them to science camp, and they like read books about science and like watched movies about science, and they tell you they knew the biography of all the scientists by the time they were 7. making them feel all these things in the classroom is actually not hard. It's really easy, right? It's so easy that despite the fact that we're not great at teaching chemistry, people still are getting chemistry degrees because it's easy to make them do that, right? Like the question is, what happens to all of the rest of us that struggled because the system was not teaching us how to use the tools we had effectively and how to develop the other tools? And what about all the other people that had so much brilliant potential, but we never developed a system that will help them develop their tools, right? And maximize these outcomes on the classroom. And that is what it comes to. And that is where equity comes to. And that is what I say when I say, what I mean when I say that equity is the center of chemistry education research. Because when equity is at the center and you design for the people that didn't come with a complete toolbox, when you design for them to actually develop the tools, when you actually design so they can maximize their engagement, that is when you stop leaving people behind. And that is when we actually are making transformation that matters. The other people are gonna be fine no matter what we do. They're thriving in the current system, they will thrive in the modified system, right? They're not, like, we're not gonna hurt them, right? And so by focusing on the marginalized populations, right, we are actually transforming chemistry culture and expanding the borders. And that is what I want to do with my research. And so I want us to stop thinking about what happens in the classroom, in companies, at work, in the lab. I want us to stop thinking it as transfer. I want us to start thinking about activation, and this is what I mean. So activation means how the learning environment interacts with students' intellectual resources. However, we usually think about this as a transfer process. So by a transfer process, I mean, I have a multi-kit pocket knife, right? And I give the student a can, right? And the student should open the can with a can opener. That is what we want. But then you give the student the can and then they use a drill, right? And then you spend, as a professor, hours wondering, why did I use the drill, right? It was so obvious. They should have used the can opener. Like, I don't understand why. Who are these students? They should not be in my chemistry classroom. Why did they use a drill? And then you just go, oh, no. But the reality is that this is assuming, right, that the only thing that matters is the student and what they brought in, right? When in reality, if you gave a student a can and they use the drill and not the can opener, that means there's something in your learning environment that gave them the signal that the drill was okay, right? You may have not done it explicitly, but there was something in the environment. It was maybe the fact that there were not clear enough instructions, but maybe it was the fact that the student didn't have a multi-tool pocket knife that had a can opener, and then he saw a drill like on the shelf, or she saw that is something she had done before and was successful at it, and she's like, why not doing it on the can? Or they think, well, I'm trying to be creative, why not use a drill instead of the can opener, right? Like, all of these things matter. And so resource activation is actually the cues, the tips that we use to give support in students' intellectual resources. And when we do good activation, students are able to engage in border crossing. And so I'm gonna get now finally then to the learning environment, right? So all this time I've been talking about the student, the things they bring, how they apply the things they bring. But at the end of the day, if we're chemistry education researchers and we acknowledge equity is important, that means we need to change something on the environment. And so learners engage with the environment that institutions and instructors create. And we have created institutions and systems of learning that purposely filter out people. And let's just try to recognizing that. It was intentional, that was how they were created, right? And now it's our job to change it. And so I'm going to talk about this study. This study was done with Dr. Nathan Boyce. He's at Queen's University of Technology in Australia. I also met him through the CAS Future Leaders program. We were part of the same cohort. And so in this sense, he had this class, right? And so students will arrive, they would have their intellectual resources. He would expect them to engage in chemical thinking. He had a curriculum, right? Like, this is the syllabus, this is the order of the classes, these are the exercises, the textbook. And he had to be like, and the way he behaved in the classroom, right? So far, I think we can all understand why all those arrows are going into engagement. And so there's this class that he teaches. So he teaches this Orgo class, Orgo 1, right? And we have 3 years of data, about 504 students. And for some reason that I don't know why to explain, they take Gen Chem 1 and organic chemistry concurrently. You probably are wondering why? I don't know. That is just how they do it there, right? This is just his reality, right? And like, even though I can question it, right? The point is this is the problem he has to deal with. And so he has students that are like dealing with the 2 chemistry classes at once. And he realized that some students were struggling with both classes and were failing the class. And so he decided to use this tool. This tool is called Zerigo. And Zerigo is an adaptive learning tool. And I will explain in a second what it does. But it's an app that students can download in their phone and they can practice organic chemistry problems with it. And so what it will happen is that at the beginning, you create your account in Zerigo, and everybody is going to be assigned to level 1, right? And after you use the app, it will move you to the level that corresponds to your current knowledge. And so let's say everybody started level 1, and after a week of using the app, this is the distribution of students. So after a week, some students, because they had high knowledge already about things, they're already in level 5, some in level 4, some in level 3, some in level 2, some in level 1. But the idea is that by using the app will recognize when a student is ready to move on, and they will move them to the next level. So the student doesn't know which level they are, they just press, right? And the problems will get more difficult through time, right? And so in theory, right, what would happen is that somebody that was a level 3 by the end of the semester will be solving level 5 problems. If you didn't use the app enough, you may only move a level or 2. But there is a possibility that somebody that started at level 1 by the end of the semester by using this app will be solving problems in level 5. And of course, if you didn't use the app, then you would have stayed in level 1, right? And so a lot of students were saying that like they love it because it replaces Candy Crush. So like when they were waiting for the bus or things like that you have like 2 minutes, they will just open their phone and do it, right? And the question becomes, can an app that is being used like Candy Crush, so literally the thing that you do for 5 minutes before your boss arrives, right, actually can support learning, right? Is it activating students? Is it activating them to think better about chemistry? So let's see. So in this graph, we have on the bottom, the 5 levels of Zerigo. So whether a student ended up at the end of the semester in level 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5. In the y-axis, we have the percentage of the grade they got at the end of the semester. So 100% to 0, right? And then because I don't have a control, right, a perfect control for this, I'm gonna use the grade they got in general chemistry 1. This is why, because they're correlated, right? And so in theory, a student that like had a high grade in general chemistry 1 will get a decent grade. Even they're taking them concurrently, right? There should be a relationship between these 2 things, and you would expect somebody that is doing good in one class to do good on the other. If a student is doing bad in one class, they will be doing bad on the other, and that was Nathan's experience, right? And so like so I use that as a sort of control. And if you're a methodologist and that has 1,000 questions about this, I'm happy to answer those questions, but I think for now, there's like a good enough basis for understanding this graph. And so let's start with students that got a high grade in Gen Chem 1. So let's say between 80 and 100%, right? And so if you never use the app, you got between a 60 and 80%. And again, logical, right? Because these 2 things are related. If you had a 60% to a 79%, you got between 60 and 40 because usually grades between Gen Chem 1 and Orgo go down a little bit. So this makes sense. And if you were failing Gen Chem and taking concurrently Orgo, well, that means you're failing Orgo. So the people in level 1, even the people in level 2, right, are a good sort of like idea of what will happen in a place where Zerigo doesn't exist, right? Because they got the results that we would expect with 2 classes that are related to one another. But what happens for the students that did use Zerigo, like Candy Crush? So students with a high chemistry grade received a bump on their grade, right? Like it actually helped them do better, and that is good. Students in the middle chemistry grades also received a bump. So like they did better than expected, right? But here's the cool thing. Students that failed Gen Chem 1 actually passed organic chemistry, right? If you got a level 5 or 4, not only you passed organic chemistry, you got a grade equivalent to somebody that had 100% in general chemistry 1. Isn't this cool, right? And this is what I mean with equity, right? Equity is not giving an equal bump to everybody, right? So the example, the different, like general chemistry, like high people and milk people, so the purple and like ugly green lines, they got the same amount of bump, but the gap remained, right? Because the bump was the same for everybody. But for people that were struggling, they got a higher bump. The app gave them a higher support, and that is what you want. You want something that will give more support to the people that need it the most, right? That is actually what equity looks like. When I saw this graph, I was just screaming of happiness. I was, I cannot believe I had this graph because this is a super cool result. And so I want you to tell me, and now let me see if this works. Sorry. Okay, so in theory, right, people can now answer the question. So I've never done this before, so I apologize for this. I hope you're answering the question. Mari, can you give me a thumbs up if it's working? Or not? Yes, okay. And so the countdown is working. Start countdown. Close voting. Weird. Maybe we're gonna omit it, but like, let me try again. No, it broke, sorry. Well, the question was, if you, now my presentation broke, thank you. Okay, let me see. It totally broke, sorry. The answer is they use the app between 2 and 5 hours through the whole semester. The whole semester. They didn't put more than 5 hours into the whole semester. So this app, by using it relatively, like really literally while they're waiting for the bus, right, did this, right? So like sometimes changes that produce equity are not disruptive and they're not that difficult to implement and they don't take that much time. Of course, this is a 99% white sample in a university where like students have like a relatively stable socioeconomic status, right? But like this is a good example of like a little thing that can make big changes. And so another thing that was interesting about this is that even though Zerigo was not about like making people feeling happy, right? They were feeling happy while solving the app. So like not only did they feel like they were learning and they were engaging, they felt like they were learning, right? And that also raised their confidence at the moment of the exam. And so that is important because the app produced both disciplinary engagement, so they were thinking about chemistry better because that's what they did better. And then they had effective engagement. And so as the conclusions, I talked about what the difference is between intellectual resources, engagement in chemical thinking. I also showed how my framework can be applied to a really simple case like this one, right? And still produce equitable results. And it was really good. And this intervention, so the Zerigo intervention was really good at addressing differences in starting knowledge between people that had high chemistry grades and low general chemistry grades. Of course, this means that there's a bunch of other things that this app is not gonna address. So if the environment in the university is oppressive and is treating people from certain social identities badly, right, we're still gonna see bad outcomes, right? And so the goal of the React framework is actually to think about what system of inequality you're trying to address, right? I'm trying to address specifically this type of system of inequality, and think about then, what is the thing you're doing in the classroom, right? That is gonna change this, it's gonna create this border crossing, right? But also you need to think at the same time if it's making changes on disciplinary engagement, effective engagement, or social engagement, right? So it's sort of a way that is allowing you to think at the median outcome of the class, right? But also within a bigger system of oppression. So instead of having systems of oppression as this big, ambiguous thing that are hard to understand, hard to measure, right? The framework is allowing them It's allowing you to actually sort of like trim it down to the thing that you have power in your classroom. So you as a professor are not gonna break everything. You're not gonna destroy all the systems of oppression, but you can do things that address them in your class. And that is the goal of the framework. And so currently what you have is students and instructors that are given too many choices that promise too much. Everybody's gonna try to sell you the silver bullet somewhere. But you really don't understand why is it working, just that it works. And we don't know why it's activating. And the goal of my research is actually to create a suite of options for instructors and tools for students, right? So that you have a decision tree that you say, I'm trying to address identity on girls of color of ages 12 to 16. So what is the thing I can do about it? And the REACT framework, once it's applied in various studies, right? You should be able to have a decision tree that you can use for that. And so you're sort of getting like my 10-year vision plan of my research. So when I get a faculty job, so I can do this. And I want to thank Dr. Timothy Emake, who is my postdoctoral advisor, Dr. Nathan Boyce, who is my collaborator in this project. They're working for Inclusivity in Chemical Science, Engineering, and Technology Network, the CIC for inviting me. So both of these institutions for inviting me, and Megan Oakley, Dr. Megan Oakley for inviting me to give this talk because I was so excited when she reached out to me. And I will be happy to take all of your questions.
Thank you so much, Paulette. That was a really incredible talk. I'm still kind of a little bit shook with that quote, you know, to be a good chemist, you must also be a good mentor. And I think that that's really something that we should embrace. Yeah, so I'm going to ask attendees if they have a question, if they could use the raise hand feature of Zoom, and they can indicate that they want to participate, and I'll call upon you and unmute you when you indicate that. And if you don't feel comfortable speaking, you can type it in and I can read it out. But we will ask that attendees just state their name and their affiliation, just so people know the question that's being asked and where it's coming from. And then Paulette is happy to answer those questions. So let's get this started. We've got some raised hands. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. So I don't know who raised hand first, so I'm not picking favorites, but we'll start with Daryl. I'll allow you to speak. Okay.
Can you hear me?
You're unmuted, Daryl. Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, my name is Daryl Reno. I'm a postdoc in the STEM Transformation Institute at Florida International University. I'm also a geoscience education researcher, not chemistry. But thank you very much for your presentation. I learned a lot. And the question I had was, were the activities in the app that you presented designed for students with particular intellectual resources?
No. So like this was an app that he had access to through somebody recommended it to him. What the goal I think is that the more we learn using this framework is that people will be able to design problems that particularly target specific resources, right? But for that, we need to first think, for example, in organic, right? What are the things we want to develop in organic, right? And so like there's a lot of chemistry education researchers that are working with that. And so hopefully if this is like sort of this like building science over the other, they will figure that out because they are really passionate about understanding all these things in organic chemistry. And I can take that and then create studies to try to think which kind of problems develop those skills. And then those problems can be used in an app or in app problem setting classes, right? So that is the ideal situation, right? In order to know which problems of the Cerebral app do this, I would need to have like a collaboration with them and have access to like a way more set of data. But like it will be cool to do that, definitely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Daryl. Now I'll call on Erica. Go ahead, Erica.
Thank you. This is Erica from Memorial University. Such a great talk, Paulette. I have a question about the border crossing idea and the expanding the borders idea. Do you have any sense for which interventions would promote either the border crossing or the expansion of the border? Or is there something that we should look for when we look at these interventions, such as that app that you mentioned, that would signal that this could be effective at moving that border or facilitating its crossing?
Yeah, I think it's just, so this framework I just proposed it, and it is going to be published in January 2020. So I still have not done enough interventions to think about it, but I do think, yeah, this app signals students, it doesn't matter if you arrive late. Chemistry is not only for the people that arrive know everything, right? And that is sort of expanding the border a little bit. And so like, that is what we are looking for and thinking about. There's interventions that use scaffolds, for example, like POGO. That is another way of expanding the border in terms of knowledge. But if we're talking about expanding the border in terms of like marginalized populations, the sad thing is that we've not been studying this enough to actually have an answer for that. And that is like, I think, a gap I saw in the literature and a gap I intend to fill with my work over the next 10 years and beyond, right? Because the problem is that I wish I had an answer for you, but we don't, because we have not heard about this enough beforehand.
That's great. Thank you, Erica. I'll call on Michelle now. Go ahead,
Hi,
Michelle.
Paulette. I'm Michelle Francel from Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania. Thank you, Paulette. That was a fabulous talk. But what I was really struck by was the low investment. So the 2 to 5 hours that had such a high payback. And I think so often when we think about doing these things, we think that it's got to be some kind of huge investment on the part of the students, on the part of the faculty. But I was really struck by that. Is that, do you think, going to be generally the case, that it's going to be small incremental changes that we make that'll help break down these boxes?
That is a great question. I think depending on the problem is the size of the intervention. I think supporting students in believing better about their skills, developing knowledge faster, I think a little investment like this one was really effective. But I think things that actually talk more about environmental factors or systemic inequities in a department, that takes time, right? Like if you have, for example, a class that is purposely built to filter out students and you want to change that, you need a committee and you need to sit down, and like that requires a way more like different like investment of time in terms of the department needs the department to believe this can happen. It means the teacher needs to believe this can happen, and then you need to convince the students this can happen. But I do think that it's a matter of the size of the problem, right? But it actually, we found that like students that you overuse the app got hurt by it because they stopped doing other things, right? And I think it also talks about that we sometimes again think that just one thing is the only way to learn. And so like, it actually is about diversifying the tools you use for learning, right? So like that is like two different parts to your question. There's 2 different parts to that answer.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Michelle. And now I'll call on Stephen McNeil. Go ahead, Stephen.
Hi, Paulette.
Hi.
How are you?
Fine, and you?
So the identity of who gets to be a chemist is socially constructed, presumably by the people that already feel they deserve that identity.
Right.
The borders that you're talking about, that people who find themselves perhaps on the outside of that box initially and have to navigate and code switch and move in and out of that border. As chemistry educators, I agree with you that maybe we should be thinking about whether we are giving our students the tools to figure out how to join that club and how to cross over into that space. But at the same time, that border is also part of the social construction that we collectively, as those who call ourselves chemists, have decided to create. So where's the work? How do we flip that around? Because this isn't the learner's fault that they have found themselves living on the outside of an arbitrarily drawn, socially constructed border. Can we use your framework? Can we use the research you're going to be doing? Or is there something else we need to be doing as the members of the community who have created and are building this wall to knock it the hell down?
Right. So I think you do a good point that the framework is great for learning related things of expanding the border, which I think it's one of the reasons people leave, right? But the truth is that no matter what I do in the classroom or what you do in the classroom, and even if you create the perfect like class process for students to feel great, and they arrive to like a lab and they get sexually harassed, or they're told like they suck, or they're told they need to put like 1,000 of hours if they won't get a degree, right? None of that will matter if the culture doesn't change, right? So the framework, it's good to address the gaps in our field as chemistry education researchers, as core practitioners, to address these sort of gaps. But that effort doesn't help if chemists, D chemists, or whoever like the D people are, don't accept that equity and inclusion are actually things that we should be talking about, right? Like, and so until we stop saying, I don't know what we're bringing equity and inclusion as a topic, that is not a chemistry related thing, I don't know what we're talking about, right? Like, there needs to be a change from other chemists. So my hope is that if chemistry education researchers are more accepted, and we create better collaboration with professors at universities, that will help change professors' minds a little bit, right? Because they sometimes are the ones who think that you need to arrive with this sort of like natural born skill to do this. And maybe with some sort of change in education will help change some minds in that sense, and some culture change will happen. But I also think other like people need to take responsibility for the fact that we have not done anything about this, and like D chemists need to do something, whoever these D people are. So thank you for that.
Yeah, this was really excellent discussion. I just have like one final thing. You mentioned chemical education not always being accepted as part of chemistry. I think that there has been a shift towards at least, you know, some members of like traditional chemistry subdisciplines embracing chemical education and the importance of it. Those that don't, you know, we're not necessarily talking about them right now. So what role can the people who are in more traditional chemistry subdisciplines play, and how can they work with chemical educators? Like what kind of relationship do you envision that would be helpful moving this forward?
Yeah, I think, so the first role, like the first thing I want to tell if any department chairs here in this talk is that there's a great cohort of postdocs like me that are doing amazing work, and we all need jobs, right? And we'll be happy to come to your department and be the first chemistry education researcher there and create a program not only to train students, but to work collaboratively with your faculty, right? And so this is a plug for all of us to get jobs because we are there, we're doing great research. We just need chemistry departments to believe we should be part of their like institution. And then professors, I think like, I mean, they got a hard job. Nobody trained them. Like nobody trained you in the Ph.D. to teach, right? And so they got a really bad deal. And so it's okay to admit, right? I don't know what I'm doing. And what I've been doing has been like what I learned on the job. And like, I think the moment we recognize that both people are bringing different things to this relationship. So I will never understand physical chemistry the way a physical chemist does. I know the basics in order to communicate with them, right? But if they bring in that knowledge and they tell me, hey, these are the things that matter. These are the things I want to like make students understand, and I want to work with you, but we trust your expertise about what to do in my classroom to change this. I think that is when we're gonna start actually doing amazing work. When we actually trust each other and create those relationships, when we both parts, right, like accept each other's expertise and respect them, right? So the first step, hire chemistry education researchers to your department and let them train other fabulous people. And two, right, it's okay to admit you don't know what you're doing as a professor. Even chemistry education researchers I know are struggling during the pandemic to teach, right? Nobody trained us for this. And so it's okay to say, I need help. And you're not less of a chemist for that, right? We're not judging you, we're here to help you. And I think that is an important thing. And I think that will come as part of the acceptance too.
Excellent. Thank you so much for an incredible talk. There's a number of comments in the chat, Paulette, just commenting on the thought-provoking and really educational session that you provided to us. We're thrilled. So on behalf of the CWIC, and also thank you to the sponsorship from CIC, we just want to thank you and provide a big round of applause virtually for you. Really enjoyed it. So.
Yes, thank you again, Paulette. That was fantastic. And thank you to Monica and the CWIC network for coming in and helping to set this and really getting this set up. So just before we wrap up, I just want to flag two more things. So we are really excited. We're going to have Paulette participating as part of our plenary discussion. at our chemical engineering conference that is happening virtually in October. So she is going to be joined with the VP of Emerging Technologies from the National Research Council Canada, Dr. Genevieve Tenguet, as well as a number of other excellent panelists and change makers in our community. And then the last piece will be looking forward to some of our next CIC talks, which is going to be looking at part of our CSCHE AGM. We're going to have Phil DeLuna coming in, and that's going to be happening on Monday, October 19th, as well as on Thursday, October 22nd, as part of our CSCT AGM. So thank you everyone for coming today and participating. Thank you again to Paulette. All right, have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.